Okay, Harper, you can begin.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that all of you could join us today. Welcome to the Pathways to Leadership series in our workshop specifically on resume and interview tips. This workshop will be focused on how to build a resume and how to prepare for your next upcoming interview. And so I'd like to welcome Mario and Claudia to the space, and I'm sorry.
You're totally fine. And then Claudia, you can go to the next slide.
Sure, yeah, sorry. Uh-oh, there we go.
Okay, and just really quickly to introduce ourselves. So for those who are not familiar with me, my name is Mario Garibay, I'm Assistant Dean of Student Affairs. I realize that I've been seeing y'all in these sessions before, so you may be familiar with me, but I don't know if you've met Claudia yet.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is Claudia Pena. I am the coordinator for student activities at Muir College, and I'm excited to be here. This is the first Pathways to Leadership workshop that I have attended, so really nice to virtually meet you all. Yeah, okay, and I believe actually I'm starting it off. All right, welcome everybody, like I mentioned. So first off, we're just going to be chatting about application resumes and cover letters. So just kind of talking about like the structure as far as like how to go about creating a resume if you've never done so before, and also cover letters and just some important tips that you can take away when filling these items out. Alrighty, so getting started. I'm so sorry. So how do you find out about the positions, first of all? And if this is your first time kind of navigating UCSD, I don't know if you are aware of Handshake. It's kind of like a platform where you can find all the student jobs that are available at UCSD, or hopefully most of them. So that's one way that you can look for some jobs around UCSD. And then another way is through our social media. So we have a few social media platforms. Your College Official is probably one of the most popular at this point, just as far as like student engagement and the most that we usually post all things, not even just Muir, but campus wide. So we also post our job opportunities on there. So specifically Muir job opportunities, but also, like I mentioned, campus wide. So if we are being told just for campus partners, any positions that are available, we usually put up that flyer and make sure that we emphasize that there are opportunities, employment opportunities on there. We also have our Facebook, so UCSD John Muir College. I'm sorry, I'm blinking on the actual, so it's like at JMC Happenings, I think is actually like the way that you could also type it in on Facebook. And then also contacting staff members. So not even just in the college system, because there are jobs that you can find within the college, like obviously Harper and also Rashma, hello, who have roles in like, our college systems, but then also like the departments. If you see that there's a department position that's open, reaching out to staff members, directly and seeing if like they know a little bit more about the position, or if they could direct you to people that might know a little bit more about the positions, and you could, talk to them about it. Or if like nothing's posted and you know of somebody that has a position at this department or like this lab, but you can't find it on Handshake, even just reaching out to like folks involved in that lab to see if there's any more information or like possible employment opportunities in the future or during that time, because there might be something that you might not be seeing. So specifically, there are positions in student affairs, red life, and academic advising. So student positions, like I had briefly mentioned, usually they're hired for like, the year, but obviously like the hiring process starts really early, especially now. So even just reaching out right now to see like what positions will be for the next year. Attending info sessions. So I believe, Mario, you might be talking about this later on too. So like, for instance, like housing assistants right now, so HAs, there are, the application is open right now, but some jobs require, especially that one, for you to attend these info sessions in order for you to apply. So just kind of looking at those prerequisitions, or like before you actually apply for a job, because there might be some things that they recommend for you to attend where do you start? The application process. So most of the jobs, aside from providing a resume and cover letter, there might be an application that's associated with that job that might ask you some supplemental questions. So making sure that you fill out the application and see that you qualify for the position, or that what the actual position does entail. So again, other things to consider are important dates and basic job functions. So in case there's required trainings and things like that that you need to attend, or again, any info sessions that you might need to attend. But making sure that you do review the position to make sure that you know what the job is and that you understand what the job entails too, because sometimes the job title might not be exactly what you might think it is. So just reviewing those things, very like the details and what comes with it. So yes, informational interviews. So I kind of mentioned this briefly before, as far as like contacting staff members. So if you are reading a job application and you're not really sure if like you understand what it is, um, set up some time or like informational interviews, as it says right here, with like staff members that might know a little bit more about the job or do know. So like right here is like hiring manager or someone that's in the position right now. So for instance, if you're interested in a student affairs internship position, possibly setting up a some time with Harper and sitting down and asking her like, what is the role like? What, like, you know, you actually do it on a day-to-day basis, and just preparing those questions of like, what do you actually want to know about the position? Because yes, you're interviewing for the job too, but you also want to make sure that you want the job, and it's something that you're actually going to be, you know, wanting to invest your time in. And then also same thing, like if you were interested in that position, like setting some time with Mario and getting to know like his perspective about the job too. So I'm going to go ahead and just click through all of these because they're all okay. So application, answering all the questions important thoroughly. Kind of mentioned that before. Using specific examples, especially like if the application itself just has like supplemental questions aside from like, you know, resume and cover letter. And yes, being as specific as possible. So like, you know, if you're answering a question about, you know, who you are, obviously like we're inclined to like, you know, give the information of you, like who you are professionally and academically, but like throwing in some like information of, you know, you as a person, so they get to know who you are and like why you want the position too, I think goes a long way, just so that you also present, you know, who you are as a person, and then also like as a professional. And then standing out, just, you know, if you can go the extra mile to like, again, just something that you could present about yourself that might be unique, you know, it's something that you've done. And sorry, this also is kind of the way I formatted it. I should, like, I'm thinking now I should have probably put resume first, but we'll go into resume and cover letter after. But letters of recommendation. So information that you want to share with the person that you're asking to write a letter of recommendation for you. So I think not all jobs ask you for a letter of recommendation, but sometimes they do. And I think when you are trying to ask somebody for a letter of recommendation, you obviously want to make sure that they're going to write a positive recommendation for you. So asking them ahead of time and giving them enough information ahead of time, as far, or like enough time to write a letter of recommendation, but information, providing that information about the job. For example, I think sometimes when I'm asking people for like to write letter of recommendations for me, I usually write, or like, I mean, obviously I ask them, like, you know, create a template where you can ask them questions about like, or kind of give them information about like what your experience is prior, because like this might be a person you haven't been in touch with for like some time, but also providing information about the job itself. So like what you are looking to do, and here's the job I'm applying for, so here's like information about that job. And like I said, like sometimes I put like specific links in there, or even just the document itself, so that they know what you're getting into, and they know how to like best, I guess, describe your efforts and like touch on areas that might be important for that job. And then yes, asking them, making sure that, you know, this person's going to be writing a positive letter of recommendation for you. Sometimes I think I do specifically ask, you know, can you write a positive recommendation for me? You know, because I think it is pretty important to put that out there, because you don't know sometimes of like what kind of recommendation what somebody might be writing for you. Yeah, so also proofreading in general with your like application, and this actually is on all of them, because I think it's important sometimes when you're writing application or like, yeah, filling out applications, and like, you know, you're copying pasting a lot of answers that you have had like or written before, because I think in general we tend to reuse, you know, work smarter, not harder. We reuse a lot of material, but we forget to proofread them, and we forget to take out things that are specific to jobs or like even titles. So making sure that you do proofread and go through every single like, you know, question, especially if it's copy and paste, and make sure that it does apply to that job. Okay, so resumes. Resumes usually 1 to 2 pages, if you haven't heard at this point, but most likely 1, trying to keep it, you know, short and sweet, and making sure that you do actually tailor, you know, your resume, and also in the future, like cover letter to that position. So anything that they're trying to highlight when it comes to that job and anything that you have experience in, making sure that you could try to adjust to make sure that all the things, the skills, all the relatable job positions do actually, sorry, lost my train of thought, do actually relate to the position that you are applying for. And again, be specific. So, you know, adding your exceptional successes, but also like specific if you're working with like numbers, and like, you know, you're trying to also talk about like the amount of, you know, items you've worked with, or like how many people you work with. So like, let's say that you're advising or like working with like 20 housing assistants as well, or like just being as specific as you can in your resume, so that it actually puts something um, like numbers, and like maybe like a little bit more, it paints a better picture of like what you've been involved in and like what you've done. Maintaining professionalism. So yeah, this made me laugh. Not pink, not scented. So try and make it something that's like professional, thinking of like Legally Blonde, of like, you know, scenting your resume and things like that. But just trying to keep it professional. Nowadays, I mean, you're submitting a lot of things like online, so you're not really able to make it scented anyway, right? But using like just nice readable fonts, I think also that goes in line with like frilly fonts and things like that. So like making sure that it's not something that you can't read, because obviously like there's some fonts that are just like you really can't tell like what it says because it's just too dramatic, I guess. And then again, proofreading, especially if you're tailoring your resume to a specific position, again, making sure that you do, I mean, for this specifically, like typos and things like that, and just making sure that the words that you are using are correct. But making sure that if you do change things up, and like I know a lot of times some people have like a mission at the top of your resume, or like an objective on the top of your resume, making sure that that sentence or like that objective does match with the job that you're applying for. Cover letters, again, so 1 page, and again, tailoring it to that exact position, making sure that you're touching on the description of that job, and saying that like all the skills and requirements that they're asking for, like touching on those things in your cover letter. And again, being specific. But I think the most important part about the cover letter is not necessarily like, don't repeat what's on your resume. Make it something that is, yes, you can include things that like you've had experience in when it comes to like the things that the items that you've put on your resume, but don't just basically use your resume and then create paragraphs out of it. I think that's the best advice that I've been given when it comes to applying for jobs, because for as far as like my last job, one of the things that she told me through the hiring process is like she like stops reading at a certain point when she realizes that it's the resume but in paragraphs. So just making sure that it's unique from the resume and it's telling more of a story about you, and specifics about you that's not already on the resume, and like touching on like those specific examples, what you've done. And again, proofreading, I can't stress this enough, and that's why I put it on every single one of these pages, because I've been guilty of like writing a different job title on the top. Like I've submitted for a job and it was actually for a job that I had just previously applied for, and I was like mortified because I was like, yeah, I understand why they didn't even email me, because it's like I forgot to proofread and that's embarrassing. So yeah, just making sure that you do proofread and you're sending it to the right people. Whatever title at the top says the right name, says the right position. And again, anything inside, if you're copy and paste reusing cover letters, making sure you change those things that relate to that job. Okay, and pass it off to Mario.
Well, thank you, Claudia. Can everyone still hear me? Sometimes my audio stops working. Okay, cool. So the first chunk of it, we really wanted to focus on, the pre-interview process, and then the next portion of it's going to be focused more so on group process and the interviews. So for those not familiar with group process, because this may be something that's new to folks, so it's a little bit different than a typical interview, but it's a form of interview. So interviews are typically involving questions with direct correlation to the position. Like they'll ask like about your qualifications and if whether or not you're qualified for the role. And that's more so what you see in the interview. So if you get to the interview process, they're just trying to ascertain that you're a good fit for the position. When you're doing a group process, they're really looking more so for how you're like typically involves like activities and discussions, and they're more so looking like how you would work with a specific group. So like you'll often see this with when they do mass hiring. So some orientation positions will have like a group process, or if like an RA or HA search will also have it, because you're hiring a full team of individuals as opposed to like one at a time. And they want to see like sort of what your dynamic will be for other people. So that's a little bit different than an interview. And so the purpose, like I said, is to just really focus on looking for the skills based on your responses and your reactions to the candidate. So like problem solving skills, interpersonal communication skills, the intra or like one-on-one communication will come up in an actual interview, but they're looking for like teamwork, how you work with others. And typically because it's a skill-based project, they'll also like folks will be looking at what your ability to work under pressure. In terms of the general structure, there usually will be some form of introductions about the process. Other candidates will introduce themselves. There's typically observers or facilitators for the project. And usually there's like 2 or 3 group activities. Again, it really depends on the search process. And again, what they're really looking for is just your ability to your ability to kind of like work through those projects. And it's less so about the actual outcome of that project or whatever the activity is, and more so the process in which you took to get there. Some tips as it relates to group process, and we're going to go over this really briefly because I want to spend a lot of the time with the interviews. So Claudia, yeah, next. You can just do all the things, yeah. So in terms of how to succeed, and this kind of goes back to everything that we've been saying with all the other like the resume, cover letter, and applications, is like prepare and research. Like actually look into what the job is entailing and what that department or what that area is looking for. And so the best way to do that, as Claudia mentioned, is to reach out to folks who are in that department, and especially like the people who are potential facilitators, observers, or the hiring managers, to see like what type of dynamics are they looking for. Are they looking for everyone to be really outspoken? Are they looking for diversity in their groups? Like what are they specifically looking for? So the more that you compare and research, like for instance, with like orientation positions, you want individuals who will be able to be caring and serving others. And so if you can highlight those things in your interview, that's probably preferred. Awareness, reflection, and just general do's and don'ts. What you want to do is aim for a neutral or positive attitude. I think it's really challenging if you're an extreme one or the other. So like in terms of, you don't want to be the person who's, taking all the time talking, and you also don't want to be the person who doesn't talk at all. You want to find that happy medium. You definitely want to demonstrate listening skills, and it's not just like communication skills, but it's also listening to others. You want to respond to others in the conversation, provide unique thoughts, and just kind of feedback to it. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're engaging others too. So it's like if somebody's shying away, like it's great if you're that person who's going to pull them back into the conversation, because that's like a priority when you're looking at group dynamics than someone who's just going to shut somebody else down. With that said, try not to interrupt or criticize other candidates. You don't, like I said, want to monopolize the conversation. You want to don't necessarily stay completely silent or check out. Remain engaged, whatever that looks like, whether that's, and we understand that there's introverts in the group, and sometimes it's challenging for a group process if you're an introvert. But you at least in some way want to make sure that you're demonstrating that you're still engaged, that you're not talking isn't because you're not paying attention, but that you're not talking because you're an introvert. And so that's looks a little bit different. And then be afraid to, don't be afraid to disagree or offer alternatives. And I think it's how you do that. So you can have a different perspective, just in a matter of like how you present that will look different. So if you have a different perspective, provide that different perspective. But at the end of the day, like, just don't be a jerk about it. I think that's like the biggest way to say it. So, and at the end, like as a whole, as somebody who oversees group processes, I'm not a 100% fan of them, just because I think it's really challenging, especially for introverted individuals, to participate in a group process. But realistically, when I do group process or I'm involved in one, at the end of the day, what I'm looking for is authenticity. So like, I want to make sure that you bring your full self, and that, I think that's way better than trying to pretend something that you're not. Because at least for myself as a hiring manager, I can tell when an individual is being fake or not, or disingenuous. And I think at the end of the day, like, really, if you bring your whole authentic self, I think that's the bigger priority. Claudia, you want to skip 2 slides? Okay, so in terms of interviews, some stuff that we want to do in terms of some tips. So next slide, please. So in terms of, like I said, over and over again, and I would say do this again, research the hiring department's website and review the job description, because often they're a good indicator of the questions. There are oftentimes are very like standard questions like, what kind of team player are you? Or like, why are you interested in the position? Or tell them a little about yourself. But like usually departments will tailor specific questions around what their different job components are. So what I would suggest is, if you are applying for a position, take that job description and give an example of a time that you did each thing, or like prepare a response for each of those bullet points. So say, for instance, there is an RA position. So you're probably going to have some form of policy, enforcement. You're going to have some form of crisis intervention. You're going to have some element of programming and some element of conflict resolution. And so what I would say is like break down those 4 different categories, and then like think of what you would say for each of those categories. Here are examples of things I've done for programming. Here are ways that I've resolved conflict, and I have a really specific experience related to that. Here's the time that I had to have a tough conversation with someone about, if they're breaking the rules, like how I would process that. Just think about the different components of the job and have responses prepared. So what I do for my interviews is actually do that on a grid. So I have like a piece of paper in my interview that has all the different areas of that position. And next to it, I have like examples of when I've done that, or like my kind of like prepared like responses that I would have for each section. And whether or not like they actually use those questions, I think just going through the process of preparing for it in that way makes you think about, oh yeah, I remember that one time that I hosted this really big program, or I remember that one time that I had to manage a team conflict. So it's like that helps in terms of your preparation, but also it's very likely that those questions will appear. Identifying specific skills and experiences as it relates to those, as I mentioned. Be early and turn off your cell phone. And I know it's really tough to like not like have your cell phone on you sometimes. I still have mine on the table during interviews, which I mute it, but I just leave it for so I can get the timing, because you want to be able to see your time. If you have a watch, I would say use a watch and you don't use your phone, because if you're constantly looking at your phone, they're going to think that you're like looking at your phone as a distraction, as opposed to looking for the time. Or oftentimes, if you're able to select where you sit in a room, sit where you're facing a clock, because oftentimes that's really helpful in terms of pacing your responses. But don't turn off your cell phone during, or mute it, or put on airplane mode or something like that. And be early for your interview. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the kind of the saying where it's like, on time, you're late. If you're 5 minutes early, you're on time. That's true. So make sure that you're appearing on time for an interview and be a little bit early. And oftentimes that will be a good opportunity for you to kind of like get settled, get any nerves out. Feel free to talk to people that are in the space. So if they're like, you're checking into a student affairs office and there's somebody at the front desk, just like have some small talk, kind of get, that will help relieve some of your nerves as well. Dress to impress. And I think there's different expectations in terms of how you would or dress for an interview. And I just add this in there, not necessarily because you need full-on professional attire. I think as you get into the professional world, you potentially will get like invest in like a suit or some nicer clothes. But realistically, like what it means for in the context of you all as college students is, you want to make sure that you're not showing up as if you just rolled out of bed. Like don't come like with tattered clothing, and also be cognizant of like what images. I would say don't have any images on your clothing, but if you have images, make sure that you're cognizant of what they are. For example, I've had students go to RA meetings and they have like this big Corona bottle shirt, it's like, okay, like one of the things is that you're supposed to enforce if students are consuming alcohol. And so I'm like, but yet you're wearing a t-shirt with a Corona bottle, a beer bottle on it. And I'm like, that's probably not the best shirt to wear for an RAHA meeting or interview. So that's an example, or just like being mindful of like what's on your clothes. Practice, so definitely practice. If you have someone who, you trust that you can just kind of like go through some random questions, have them ask you questions. If you don't want to do that, one thing that I've done and I've known other people to do too is to actually interview yourself in a mirror. And I know it sounds really like silly, but like do it. And then that way you can like, I think part of practicing and part of like getting through your nerves is just saying the words that you would say during an interview. And I think you just need to speak them out loud so you feel comfortable and you're able to own your responses so that when you're in an interview, it feels more natural than if, and you break down some of those nerves that you may have. The next tip that I would give is slow down, listen, and answer the questions completely. And I've seen this happen a lot where folks don't pay attention, like already ready to respond as soon as they're like halfway through the question. And then especially because sometimes they'll do like multiple questions. So like they'll ask like 3 questions in one question. Like you want to be able to actually hear it all the way through so that you can completely respond to it. Because if you only heard like half of it, you're like, oh shoot, what was the rest of the question? And you're still expected to answer it. But if that were to happen, then feel free to like ask them again to respond, to say the question again. That's okay. If you're doing it consistently and you're asking more than once, then it's like, are you actually paying attention? But if you're just like, oh shoot, I just didn't either understand the question or the question is written in a way that it's like asking you 3 different things at the same time, I think it's appropriate for you to ask them to repeat it again, just to make sure you get each of those points down. One thing I do with this is, and this doesn't work for everyone, but for me, like I will write down the question as they're saying it. And if I'm that way, like as I'm giving a response, like I make sure that I cover the full question that they had asked. And then at the end of the interview, there is 99% chance that they're going to ask you, do you have any questions for them? The worst thing you could say is no. Like ask a question. And I would say, again, prepare some questions in advance. What's the culture of the office like? What is the most challenging thing for someone who's in this role? What is the favorite thing in the role? What are you looking for in this position? Whatever those questions are, like the reason why they add that is that because they want to make sure that A, you've researched the position, and B, that they understand that you've thought through the interview thoroughly and you've thought through the position thoroughly. So if you have an opportunity to ask questions, ask them, because that keeps you engaged. I think, again, it's really a good balance too, because you don't want to ask too many questions. You also don't want to ask no questions. So like identify like 3 or 4 questions per interview. The next slide is about the CAR method. And so some of you may be familiar with this if you've gone to other sessions around interview tips or resume tips. But for interviews, typically there's a 3-pronged approach to a CAR method. One is when you're talking about a situation, talk about the initial challenge you had that you solved or planned to overcome. The second is to describe the action or steps that you took to solve the problem, focusing on what you did specifically. This is great when you're in an interview to provide specific examples of something you've done. Like, I think as a whole, you generally are able to say, like, give examples about what your general approach to things are, but they want to make sure that you've had some form of experience or some form of transferable skill in that process. So in terms of that action and challenge part, they want something really specific to say, okay, this person is a good fit for this role, or they're prepared for this position. The last thing is what you learn from the situation. What are the benefits? What did you gain from those situation? Again, it's okay to say that you had a challenge in your experience because you are human. But at the end of the day, you also want to demonstrate that you've learned from that situation. So even if you have a interview question about, like, talk about time that you had a failure or something that did not go well, that's the time when you can demonstrate, this is what didn't go well, this is what I did to address it, and this is the outcome that came from it and what I've learned from it to prevent that from happening again. Because you want to be able to demonstrate that you've learned from that situation, and you also want to demonstrate that, again, at the end of the day, you're a human, so you can have mistakes, but that you learn from it so that you don't repeat those mistakes again in the future. So that's a little bit about the interviews. So to practice a little bit, what I'm going to ask you to do in a quick fashion is to answer the 3 following questions, and I'll broadcast that. I'll put in the chat right now. And then we're going to break into groups of 2 or 3. And this is going to be a quick activity, but for the next minute and a half, I'm going to break you up into groups of 2 or 3. So realistically, you should be answering these questions in about 30 to 45 seconds. And then just take turns. Claudia and I will try to bounce around to the different rooms, but just if you want to go ahead and break down into the rooms, I'll open up those rooms right now, and I'll also pause the recording. So in terms of, like, after the interviews, so now what? So once you finish your interview, relax. Like, try not to obsess over how it went. At the end of the day, like, once you finish your interview, you finish your interview. There's nothing really you can do about it, so you just have to move forward from it. And one thing that I would really suggest you to do, and people are moving away from this, but I think it's actually really helpful still to do it, is to send a thank you card or email if appropriate. More so the email, I think, is standard these days. I think people have moved away from the thank you cards. If you have a more old-fashioned hiring manager, they typically will go with the thank you card. But I think, like I said, these days, just with sustainability as well as just technology, like, email is more appropriate. It's a nice gesture because it helps you stand out from the crowd. Again, if you're applying for if there's multiple people applying for a position, it's like, oh, like, I remember Claudia, for instance. And so that's really helpful for you to do. But also, I think this is a good opportunity for you to remind people, or to, like, fill in a gap if you did not do well with a question. You can be like, oh, not necessarily like, oh, I forgot to mention this, but also say, say there was a question around programming, you forgot to give an example of programming, be like, I hope I was able to convey my passion around programming because I've done programming for the past 5 years. So, like, this is a good way for you to, like, if you forgot to say something during your interview, to kind of, like, couch it in a thank you email. So also, you want to make sure that you're not being too generic, because, just, again, going back to the intentionality of, like, looking through a job description to really tailor your interviews and resume to. Same with, like, the thank you card. You want to make sure that, like, it's not just something you copy pasted from another interview that you position, or another interview you applied for, a position you applied for, that you're, like, genuinely, like, writing it for this job search. And then sometimes interacting with other candidates, whether or not you're their friends. So sometimes, like, you and a few friends will be applying for the same positions, whether it's like council or interviews with, like, HARA or WELS. Like, there may be times that, like, 5 of you all apply and really only 3 or 4 of you get the position. It's natural to talk to your friends about the experience, but remember, don't share or discuss interview questions. That's a big no-no, is, like, don't tell people questions that are on the interview, and don't try to put each other down or try to one-up each other. Like, some people, could be a really impactful experience for them, and you don't want to necessarily put them down because they didn't get a position. But I think it's okay to move forward together and just like acknowledge that like they need their space if they need to recoup from it. Um, just, still remain friends at the end of the day, whether or not, you all get positions. Next. So once decision letters do go out, um, there's two types of responses. The first is the, unfortunately, at this time, we're unable to offer you a position. Um, as it says there, it sucks. We're sorry, but there's no way around this. Unfortunately, there's a lot of you and a certain number of positions. And so whenever you're applying for different positions, it is okay not to get a position. It sucks and it hurts in that moment, and we get it. But at the end of the day, it's okay that you can think about it, how to move forward. Keep reading. Sometimes I think in the initial, like, unfortunately, you may not necessarily know, but there may be an alternate offer or a non-offer. So like the difference between, or excuse me, an alternate or a non-offer with possible alternatives. So just make sure that you're reading all the way through, because you don't want to miss like a second chance if they're saying, if you did such and such thing, or if there's this other position you apply for, consider that. You consider whether or not response is needed and be honest about it. So do not accept an alternate position if you're definitely unavailable or unhappy. And do accept the alternate position if things are still up in the air and you're still genuinely interested in the position. So I think, when if you are offered an alternate position, just consider whether or not you actually want to take it or not before you just respond. One of the challenging things as a hiring manager is if people continue being an alternate and then they end up deciding that they don't want to do it, but they didn't tell you that. Because then ultimately, if a position does open up, I'm going to go to like Harper and say, hey, a position opened up. Are you interested? And then she says, actually, I never like I ended up applying for this other job instead. Let me know that in advance rather than me having to go back and look for another alternate. And then ask for a file review and or follow-up conversation with the hiring manager. I know for myself, and probably Claudia feels the same, like I love to give feedback to people who are interviewing. This is an educational process, it's a growing process. And so I'd rather you come talk to me and ask me why you didn't get a position. So I can really talk through with it, because if it's an ongoing issue, I want to be able to help you process through that and learn about it now. Then you continue that issue in future interviews. So definitely reach out to your hiring manager if they're open to meeting with you to discuss, why you didn't get the position. And it's okay not to want to talk about it, but also trying to make sure that others don't feel bad if they did get the position. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really about fit for the roles, and there's only a certain amount of roles. And so you don't want to make your friends or colleagues feel guilty about, the fact that, or your other students feel guilty about having gotten it, because it did work out for them. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out for you this time. So just kind of keep that in mind. Next slide. On the flip side, if you do get an offer, celebrate, happy dance. But make sure you're revisiting all the mandatory dates and work events that are in that letter. And then confirm or deny your offer. It's okay to say, if something changes again, that you decline that offer. Just be really transparent. You don't want to I've had situations where students ghost me in the process, and that is not good, because then people remember that. I remember those things. And so you want to make sure that you're not ghosting your person if you can't accept the position. Just say you're not, and that's totally fine. Carefully read all the subsequent emails and follow through with it. And then also, if you do get offered the position, I would still go in for a feedback or a file review. I think it's only helpful information to get, and also be kind of conscious to others. So on the flip side, for those that did not get the position, be supportive of those people who did. If you did get the position, be supportive of those that didn't. You don't want to rub it in their face either that you got a position and they didn't. Next, please. And then, one thing that I see sometimes with some of our students is, remember, regardless of the outcome, you have to behave appropriately after decisions come out and make a difference. So we do exist in a fishbowl. So be mindful of your venting, be mindful of your social media presence. I have seen individuals post on their social media, and I am their friend, about how upset they are with the hiring process, and that is not good. Because it begets negativity. It's non-inclusive behavior rhetoric are also just actions against policy. You also want to be mindful of your social media presence, but be really mindful of that negativity. Like, it's challenging, it's tough when people don't get positions. Like, I completely understand. Like, if I can tell you all the positions that I applied for and didn't get in my life, like, we would be here all day. Well, maybe not all day, but like, what I'm saying? Like, people don't get positions, and that's okay. And it's tough and it's hard, and we process through it. And it doesn't mean anything about you as a person. I know it's easier said than done because I've been on the other end of it where I don't get a position, but it's nothing about you as a person. It just did not work out that well. And the last thing you want to do is put on social media, because that will get back to the person who's hiring. And again, folks, don't forget those types of things. So make sure that that you're mindful of what you're posting. And just because you're not following friends linked to, et cetera, with your supervisor or professional staff, that does not mean that your behavior is not being seen by others in the community. And if these concerns or issues, consider whether or not that is a fit for you. And so, yeah, I would say also, it's always good to just kind of be direct with feedback and communication. So if there are any issues that you have related to the outcome, like, just go talk to the person who did the hiring manager, because I think it's also really helpful to do so. But those are all the information we have. I know we went through a lot of information in a short amount of time. I'm going to stop the recording now and open it up if there's